All right, well, let's now continue with the next leader mentioned at the very end of the last video, the leader called the Archon, A-R-C-H-O-N. This word in Greek means simply a ruler. And the first instance that we have recorded of archons is in 684 BC. That was the first year at which an archon position was recorded. These archons were typically elected by a lot, and therefore not directly elected by the people for some time to come. So initially, their position isn't especially democratic in the sense we would think of. However, the departure in Athens from the king as the supreme leader to this group of archons, even though it's probably more accurate to think of it as an oligarchy rather than a strict democracy, is still nonetheless a step forward for the Athenians toward eventually establishing the full democratic government that we know of later. So there were 9 archons altogether who, as we said, were elected by lot initially, annually, in the polis of Athens. They had different names and different responsibilities. The first one is the one that seems to demonstrate that the archons had some connection with the previous governmental position of king. He was referred to as Basileus, B-A-S-I-L-E-U-S. That word in Greek means king, so this appears to be the carryover from the king position in Athens to the current archon position. The Basileus archon was principally responsible for religious matters, such as priesthoods, the worship of the gods, and such in Athens. There was one archon referred to as the eponymous archon, and it was this archon whose name was used in order to designate the archon year in Athens. The archon year typically ran from summer to summer, so it's not uncommon when you look at dates in Athenian history, sometimes other Greek cities also, to see 2 dates next to each other written with a slash. And that's because that we know that a particular event happened in the archonship of a certain person, but we don't know which side of the calendar year that particular event happens to be in. So as a result, we're forced to hedge with the slash approach, like saying, for instance, 433/2 BC because of the use of the archon year. The eponymous archon was responsible for the city itself, which means city administration, infrastructure, roads, upkeep of buildings, other financial matters like taxes would have come under the control of the eponymous archon. We then have the polemarchus, P-O-L-E-M-A-R-C-H-O-S, the one in charge of war. The Greek word for war is polemos. We have the English word polemic and polemical coming from that. The war archon, as suggested, was responsible for the training of men who were to fight, and would also be responsible for the upkeep of any equipment like ships, armor, and such that would be needed for soldiers to fight on land and for sailors to be able to row properly at sea in warships, or simply to travel long distances if they had to go out on campaign. The polemarchus is a position that you should take note of right now because at one critical point in history, the polemarchus Miltiades, M-I-L-T-I-A-D-E-S, Miltiades, was responsible for convincing the polemarchus archon Callimachus to vote in favor of initiating the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC when the Persians invaded Attica under King Darius in the first of the 2 invasions by the Persians. So the polemarchus position ended up having a very important historical ramification for the city of Athens. Finally, there were the 6 thesmothetes. They are the remaining archons of the 9 altogether. So we have one of these, one of these, one of these, and 6 of these. The thesmothetes are the legislators, and that's in fact what their name in Greek means. Somebody literally who places or who establishes law. So they are the ones who were in charge of the particular laws under which the city of Athens was governed. Now, with regard to the government, this is as far as we've gotten to for the moment. In our next video, we will highlight one particularly important archon named Solon, who in 594 BC established the first of what could be considered a real democratic government to be set up in the city of Athens. It's important here, however, to note that the Athenians also had some very important political myths that they like to tell about their own prior foundation. First of all, if you look on your map, you will see that the city of Athens lies on the spit near the Gulf of Sunium. And that spit of land the Athenians claimed in their mythology had been always occupied by the same people, that is, Athenians, for the entire history of the city. We do know that the city of Athens does go as far back as Homeric times, because, and by extension, therefore, back to Mycenaean times. So now we're talking like 1300, 1200 or so BC. That means about 400, 500, 600 years before the time that we're currently talking about. The reason why we know that is that in Homer, the Iliad, when he catalogs all of the ships and allies who will accompany the Greek army to go fight the Trojans, he specifically names the Athenians as being included in that group. So that does mean that the city of Athens already existed prior to the loss of the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations that characterizes the period before the Dark Age period that comes before the period of the Polis that we're now discussing. So autochthony is a Greek word that means having the same tract of land, basically, or the same people on that tract of land. So the Athenians claim that they always occupied that area of land, and at no point did they get conquered by anybody else, nor did anybody else come in and conquer them, nor did they conquer anybody else to push anybody out. So this is a tricky concept because in the period after the loss of the Mycenaean civilization, for about 100 years, we have a so-called Dark Age period when very little was going on. And then we hear about the influx of a tribe of people known as Dorians, as well as another tribe of people called the Ionians, who are sort of there reoccupying the land. And the way the Athenians have it, the Dorians came in and reoccupied places such as Thebes and Sparta, turning them eventually into those polis, and ended up driving out pre-existing people referred to as Ionians. So these Ionians needed to flee someplace and essentially fled into Attica, came to the Piraeus harbor, sailed away with the help of the city of Athens already in place, and ended up going east across the Aegean Sea over to found cities such as Miletus and Ephesus over in Asia Minor. So this would have been part of the colonization period that started getting going something like 900, 800 BC as Greece was gradually emerging out of that Dark Age period. There were several cities, including Athens and also Corinth, a city to its west, that started sending out groups of their citizens to colonize new locations and found new cities. So the Ionians apparently settled over in the east with the assistance of the Athenians when they migrated away from Greece in response to this influx of these people referred to as Dorians. We can't really identify either of these myths historically all that well. So the one about autochthony at least is plausible. There doesn't seem to be any direct evidence that the Athenians were ever actually conquered. The Ionian migration is much more dubious. The idea that the Ionians were fleeing in a big mass and all went through the Piraeus harbor doesn't seem especially credible, and especially given that the Athenians can then claim that they have a kind of mother city primacy, as it were, over the Ionian cities that are later established over in the east. That seems a bit of a reach historically. It does seem like a justification that the Athenians have for the reasons why they exert so much influence over this region in later days. But still, these are important myths for the city of Athens, and much of this does underpin the reason why the Athenians became so influential, especially in the 5th century BC, when they start exerting themselves intellectually and politically together. It's in that kind of environment that ancient Greek drama is going to form. All right, so we mentioned the particularly important archon Solon. In our next video, we're going to give him some attention to explain the new form of pre-democratic government that he formed in the city of Athens. See you next video.